Right, good afternoon, everybody, and good evening to our speaker, who's Zuraidah Ibrahim, from the Executive Managing Editor at the South China Morning Post. She's in Hong Kong, where it's early evening. My name is Sherilyn Ireton. I'm the Executive Director of the World Editors Forum, and I'm sitting in London. So from Canada to Asia, we're getting a real insight into the different but very similar challenges that newsrooms are facing. Zuraidah is going to be talking about how they've been changing culture at the South China Morning Post. They've had an incredible couple of years from a news gathering perspective and from a challenging time for staff, starting with the Hong Kong protests in 2019, COVID, and now, of course, challenges with security legislation. So for reporters and for staff, it's been a relentless cycle, during which time they've changed their newsroom, they've changed their strategy. So Zuraidah, welcome. We look forward to what you have to say.
Good evening, everybody. Here today. I'm sure many of you are far more knowledgeable about transformation than I am, but I'm happy to share with you our own experience, and hopefully we can have a lively discussion after that. I should start by introducing the South China Morning Post. You can see here, this is a copy of our first edition. The South China Morning Post has been Hong Kong's paper of record since 1903. That's almost 118 years. Which is a long time, but of course it's a young paper compared to India's oldest newspaper, which I'm told is the Bombay Sumatra, which will turn 200 years old on July 1st. So congratulations to anyone from that publication who might be listening in. But I want to emphasize that increasingly we are not just a Hong Kong newspaper. We have correspondents in several parts of the US, Europe, Africa, and Asia. And so the scope of our coverage has grown, and so has the diversity of our audience. Hong Kong now makes up just 10% of our overall audience, but they remain an important segment because they are our core subscribers for both print and online. The US and parts of Southeast Asia, notably the Philippines, Malaysia, and Singapore, are now amongst our key market stone areas. That means whatever we cover, we have to be mindful that we're reaching multiple audiences, and our coverage has to be very dynamic and nimble to adjust to the needs of the audience, because what might appeal locally may not resonate globally or even regionally. So we are very, very mindful of this, and it's something that we obsess about constantly, about the need to reach out to different audiences and to speak their language and to attend to their interests. I'll start very quickly on what a digital-first approach means for us. Some examples would be how, we are very focused on transformation. We have been very focused for the last 5-6 years on how we need to have a digital-first approach. We are a legacy masthead publication, and I don't need to tell you why digital matters. Why internet penetration is so ubiquitous that you can't do without digital. So I think how we organize ourselves in ways that are logical for our readers and for ourselves is very important. Very early on, we identified for ourselves 4 key markets: Hong Kong, as I said, international, Asia, and US. This is part of our effort to show the right content to the right audience. I'm sure some of you might ask why the focus on home pages when this might not be the first pages that readers see these days, with search and social traffic playing a bigger part than home pages. But here at SCMP, we've been quite lucky. A lot of our traffic still comes through our own home pages, the 4 editions that we have. And each of the editions is carefully curated with newsroom leaders deciding what stories to rank and where to place them at which part of the day. And this is based on a mix of editorial judgment and live data. So in the past, for those of us who started in print, you have the daily budget, right? Where you discuss stories in the morning and maybe one more time in the evening. We still do that, but we now maintain a very live and dynamic budget where we plan stories to be published almost every hour or so, barring breaking news. We even today, we are still very conscious of SEO. Even though we can't quite predict Google's algorithms, they frustrate us sometimes, but we try. We are very big into doing keyword search and finding out how our competitors are faring. Analytical tools are also essential to help us find out what each country is reading. Our digital team monitors chart beat, not just for the big picture view of overall concurrent traffic, but we filter via geographical location, the type of traffic, and we drill really down to the granular detail. On top of off-the-shelf data boards, we have also built our own analytics dashboards, and our data team does a daily dive of where our traffic is coming from, who's reading us, and our mantra is really how do we try to meet our readers at their point of need. Beyond the daily grind, they also monitor longer-term trends and provide insights to editorial. So I just want to emphasize that it's not just the digital team that looks at this data, it's the entire newsroom and key desks right down to individual reporters who look at the waxing and waning of traffic to plan for publication times. Every reporter is very conscious of data. Everyone has his own dashboard. In the newsroom, we have new screens showing chart beat 24/7. I must confess, this took a bit of time getting used to. Reporters would feel despondent when their stories did not take off. But I think over time, people have also learned to have thicker skins and become more resilient and galvanized. To sum up, a very few editorial decisions are made without us being aware of what people will be interested in. So knowing, for example, what Singapore wants from us helps us to serve Singapore readers better, just as we try to find out what's going on in the US and try to tailor our content to that market. It is not a perfect science, even though it is very much data-driven. We are fully cognizant of the fact that readers are fickle, tastes change, trends change, and while we try to meet readers at their point of need, sometimes they've moved on and sometimes they do so, and sometimes we do so at the cost of not doing other stories which are just as important for our editorial agenda. So it is a bit of a balancing act that we don't always get right, but we try. Then we go and talk a bit about how we have covered two events to demonstrate to you or to illustrate and share with you how we embody this approach. So, for example, we know that live events are very important for us because so many things are happening, and in the Hong Kong market, news moves at a very fast pace. This is a very activist government these days. So since the start of the protest last year, we decided that we wanted to focus on building our own in-house tools. So for those of you who remember starting live blogs back in the day, in the mid-2000s, using Scribble It Live or Tumblr, right? We used to use that tool as well, but then we realized that it wasn't working very well for us, and so we spent a lot of time building our own tool to do live blog, and it has proven to be very successful. So I just want to walk you through how we covered the Hong Kong protests, for example, where we no longer just think of the story as the story, but we obsess about the assets or the furniture that amplify the story, that allow us to reach out to our readers in different ways. So I'll start with just the Hong Kong protests. There's a video here that I won't run through because we might not have time, but this is how our live blog looks like on the desktop. And you can see that left column there. If you want a very quick and dirty summary of what's been going on throughout the day, it's there on your left. And the fuller picture, the fuller live blog is here. So when the protest started, we had this live blog going sometimes for 8 to even 12 hours. The protesters would go out at about just after lunch, and they would continue well after midnight. For those of you who may not be familiar with the story, I think maybe I should just very quickly explain that the protests were triggered by people's opposition to the extradition bill, which would have sent criminals in Hong Kong to the mainland, where the legal system is far less transparent, if not opaque, to many of us who are used to living in international cities. So opposition to it kind of built up over the summer of 2019, and it became more and more violent as the months wore on, and people were out on the streets clashing with the police every weekend, and then increasingly every other day. And so we had to be there to cover it for our audience, our core audience, but also for our international audience who were trying to make sense of this. So apart from the live blog, we had video embeds, which we would update very regularly, because we had not just reporters on the ground, but videographers on the ground. And we also had a very active social media feed where we got people to constantly send tweets out, and then we would embed them in the live blog just to keep the content flow going. And apart from that, we were also collating daily data on what was going on, such that we were later able to put together this award-winning multimedia graphic. Again, this was our attempt to tell the story in yet another way. And while videos and text and tweets do a very good job of telling the story, sometimes it's the details that escape the big picture view that videos afford us. So we then went a bit deeper to look at the gear that the protesters wore, the tactics that they had. And again, this was a very successful multimedia presentation that resonated well with our readers. And in a way, the way we did the explainers, sorting out, the details of the protests, who was fighting whom, what sort of gear they were using, how they were resisting tear gas, was kind of prescient in the sense that when the trouble occurred on the Capitol in the US, a lot of people actually contacted us and wanted to use some of the examples that we had in terms of illustrating a conflict, a very real modern day conflict of young people being at the front lines of protests. And the same was the case in Thailand and in Myanmar. We also had queries from people who kind of took inspiration from the stuff that we put out. I'll just move on now to COVID and how we covered COVID. Again, we took a very multi-desk approach. It's not like one desk owns the story, but every desk was involved to cover the story as comprehensively as possible. One big difference this time was that we used a widget that we worked very closely on with the Johns Hopkins School, and this widget proved to be extremely popular. We got really a lot of hits from people wanting the data on a daily basis, 24/7. And then we tried later to replicate it with the vaccination rates in Hong Kong, and that again has done very well. And one difference between this and the protest was that we also decided to have a microsite, because we felt that this would be a good repository of content, and this was going to be a long-running story. So it's to give people a chance to just go there and look at the data as and when they needed to. And again, we went very big. I have to rush through because I think we might need more time for discussion. So these features are all on our website, and I would really invite you to take a look. So when we did breaking stories, we were also very big with infographics. Now I want to talk about what do these examples, what's under the hood, right? How do we go about covering these stories in a way that utilizes the strengths of the entire newsroom and is data-driven, and yet very conscious of the need to stay true to our own journalistic values. So I think the first thing I want to emphasize is that data metrics are used and discussed in the newsroom daily. They inform our newsroom decisions. We do a lot of A/B testing of headlines. It's something like we sleep and dream, live and breathe data. It also helps us to shape the stories that we want, because we see what readers want and we try as far as possible to meet the need where that need is reasonable. So I'm sharing with you some of the data sheets that we have regularly. We share every day with all reporters. Data is transparent. Everybody gets access to it, and this helps to educate our reporters. So we track our local audiences, we track our regional audiences and our global audiences. And like I said earlier, we don't go down to the granular detail, like where you are from, what your reading habits are. And over time, we've also introduced some elements of AI where we try to push content that we think you might be interested in. Internally, how do you get people to be interested in data and to see that as a vital tool to pursuing good journalism? I think a lot of it has to do with education. We do a lot of internal training. We've ramped up our SEO training. We focus on best practices, and it occurs at all levels of the newsroom, not just newsroom leaders, not just the production editors, but everybody. And it underpins this idea of educating people, getting people comfortable with data, underpins all of our digital content. The other thing that we're very big on is cross-functional collaboration. We rely, in the old days, we tend to think of the IT guys as the people who we call whenever our computer is not working. But now IT, the product team, we call them at SEMP, has a very important role in helping us shape our platforms in a way that we can reach out to our readers, engage them, and retain them. So we have been doing some experimentation with our storytelling tools. For example, we've set up a knowledge page which tries to mimic Google Discover in terms of predicting the questions that you want to ask, and we have tried to put them all together in one URL, as it were. And so that has proven successful. It's still we're still in our early days, but we hope to produce better results over time. And we also have another team called the marketing or the audience growth team that do a lot of initiatives to push out content, to make sure that our audience knows where to find the content. They do this through a variety of ways, from native advertising to newsletters to a lot of other promotional content. So like I said, Google is so important to us, and Google give us a significant amount of traffic, and that's why we have to be very responsive to Google. I'll just skip over this and go quickly into newsroom culture. So newsroom culture, as I said, we're a 118-year-old newspaper. We started out as a local masthead, and we've expanded. We focus not just on Hong Kong and China, and for us, really, it's the newsroom culture. How do you build a newsroom, a digital-first culture, making sure that thinking digital is part of our DNA. To us, it's partly a talent challenge, partly a training challenge, but also a leadership challenge. I think the first thing is that you need to get your reporters on board. You mustn't be ageist and think that only younger people can be digitally savvy. I think this idea of a digital divide between digital natives and non-natives is very outdated. Everybody can go digital. The most important thing is to educate your reporters to be nimble and receptive to change and experimentation, and giving them the room to fail. So, for example, when we asked our reporters to tweet, some of them got overexcited and overdid things, but we just had to tell them, hey, let's dial it back a little. So these are areas where we give some latitude for people to experiment, and we don't take a very punitive approach when people fail. I think the second thing is that you have to make every big story a cross-desk, cross-department effort. You want not just one desk involved, but many desks involved to explore different angles, different ways of storytelling. You want other departments to help you with data tracking, with product distribution, whether it's a special newsletter or special marketing outreach. You have to break down walls. In the old days when we started out, there was always inter-desk rivalry. I think that has to go out the window, and it has to be not just beyond the newsroom. It has to be well beyond the newsroom. You have to involve the other departments if you want to prime yourself for success. I think the third thing is that we do need to understand that it can be very hard to get people to embrace digital first. Back in 2016, 2017, when we started out, we still had reporters thinking that they could save their scoops for the right day or right time or save it for print. But now nobody at all thinks that way. We are ready to break something when we are ready, and we do it. So our digital first traditions are now baked into the newsroom. It's part of the newsroom culture. They know data is transparent, and every day they get an email summary of how they've performed. Fourth, I want to talk about when you go all digital. We don't think it's a good idea to neglect print. I think you should think of print as your prom night, where you especially dress up, put on your best face and best behavior, be on your best behavior. It's a good showcase of what you're capable of online. It helps your brand name at the newsstands. Fifthly and lastly, I think we do need to remember, even though we're in the digital first era, the basic values of journalism, of being trustworthy, being accurate with the facts, playing fair, and giving all sides to a story are more important than ever before. Whether it is print or digital, these are fundamental virtues, I think, without which we should all not be in this business of holding the powerful to account. So I'm not going to go over this last slide. This is just a summary of our content processes, how it all starts, and how we curate and how we distribute. I do hope that when times are better and people can travel, you can visit us at the South China Morning Post. This is us in our newsroom at Times Square. I'll end here, and I'll be happy to take questions. Thank you.
Good. That's fabulous. Thank you so much. There are a few questions about COVID and the work from home culture. The one relates to the challenges that you faced and how you dealt with them. And the second is whether what kind of normality you're going to be returning to. Is everyone going to go back to the office, or are you looking at a hybrid model? I think let's go with those two first.
Right. So yes, the pandemic, we were hit by it very early on. We had someone who was infected in our newsroom, and of course there was total panic. We had to shut down the newsroom for a couple of weeks. Everybody had to work from home. We had to make sure there was equipment that was working. And then it became more and more normal to just stay at home, as I'm sure all of you have experienced. We actually found that a lot of people like working from home and were not necessarily less productive. If anything, a lot of people said they became far more productive and they were working well beyond what they needed to do. And so we were very concerned about the mental well-being of our colleagues. We tried to introduce Zoom meetings where people would exchange ideas or just, relax over lunch. So people were given motivation to kind of, experiment on how they would stay connected. And one negative outcome of working from home actually for us has been, it's made the newsroom less sticky. It's made people reconsider whether they actually need a job or they should just go back to their home country, because our newsroom is a very diverse newsroom. A lot of people are not from Hong Kong, so I think because of the pandemic, because they realized that they could work from different places, people made decisions to kind of leave the newsroom. So right now, we're in a 60-40 arrangement where we encourage people to spend 60% of the time in the office, and when they have real hard thinking to do and need downtime on their own to write a deep feature, for example, they're more than entitled to do their work from home. And all our meetings now take place online, so everybody has the option of dialing in rather than being physically present. So that's where we're at.
Are there any functions that are not able to be done? For example, heavy video or any part of the newsroom that needs to be in the office?
So in those few weeks when we were completely shut down, no, everybody operated remotely. Even our video editing, we didn't have the studio, so we turned everybody's home into a studio when we needed them to go live. But because we had prior planning, so we had about a 1 day where we kind of did an audit of the equipment that we would need to operate remotely, and then we quickly, worked out the logistics to make sure that people had what they needed. The funny thing that I want to share with you is that a lot of people started having back problems because they didn't have the right chairs or desks, because Hong Kong, if you've visited us, we all live in shoe boxes. 400 square foot apartment is a luxury. So people were finding themselves really cramped out. So we actually allowed them to take chairs from the office to bring home. We arranged for that.
Fantastic. You talked a bit about the mental health and welfare of your staff. Given the political and social change that's going on in Hong Kong, have you done anything special, and how are you keeping particularly your younger staff motivated and engaged so that that line between activism and journalism is not blurred?
Yeah, that's an excellent question, Charlene. I'm not sure we have a definitive answer. It's a work in progress. I think it's very hard for young people to cover the story and not see themselves as part of the story, because the frontline protesters all tended to be their friends, their fellow undergrads in the universities that they go to. So, and this was their city. This was the place that they were born in, have grown up in, made their first friends, had their first romances, got married, have children. So it was very emotional. There were moments where we had to have very deep conversations about how to separate your personal feelings, leave them at the door, and be as professional as you can. But we recognize that all of us are human, and sometimes we find it very hard to make that separation. But we try, and I think it really calls for an empathetic leadership that allows people the space to have their emotional meltdowns, and then we were very conscious of the fact that some people are taking it very personally, and we would advise those people to kind of take time out. So in the summer of 2019, I think we had 1 or 2 people who said, hey, I need time out, I need a couple of weeks out, and we were fine with that. Yeah. Mm-hmm. It's a lot better now. People are depressed for different reasons now.
In terms of that age gap, and one of the speakers yesterday said that if you're a manager and you don't have a mentor who's under 30, then there's a problem. Do you encourage that cross fertilization of age-related ideas and paradigms?
Absolutely. I think it is very, very important that we stay grounded and we make sure that the people we hang out with are not just replicas of ourselves. Because if that happens, then groupthink will happen, and then the product that you put out, the stories that you put out will just speak to that particular audience. I must say, though, we are all creatures of habit, so it's very hard for us to get out of our daily routine and make sure that we reach out to other people. But in the teams that we have, we always try to be conscious of diversity. Some of it has happened naturally because many of us, as I said, are not from Hong Kong. We grew up in different places in the West, in Asia, in China. So just that very mix allows us to be more creative, more questioning, I think. But the age issue is a very real thing, yeah.
We're going to be cut off in a couple of seconds. There are two more questions which I'm going to ask you to have a look at and perhaps answer offline. The one is that the reliance on Google as a search engine, do we need to build our own system? That's the one. And what were the challenges of transforming your newsroom? So perhaps you can drop those into an email to either of us. And then thank you. Thank you so much for your time. And we wish all of you all the best for the rest of the year.
Thank you.